Over the course of 100 days, I built Jurassic World from the ground up on my very own private island. The purpose of this was not for science, not for humanity, but for profit. Join me as over the course of 100 days, I make some very questionable ethical decisions, open as many gift shops as possible, and exploit nature's most spellbinding creatures to the max. So grab your popcorn, hide your intern, hit that like button, and let's see how far greed and genetically engineered dinosaurs can take us on our quest for world domination. Welcome to Jurassic Capitalism. And to tell you this story, it's time to take you back to where it all began on day one. On day one, I began by creating my very own private island that would house my very own Jurassic World. Once I was satisfied with the terrain, I placed down an arrival point where our guests could arrive at our park, and then a visitor centre. I then had to power said visitor centre, so a power station followed, and once we had power, the guests started to flock through the door to see precisely 0 dinosaurs and 1 visitor centre. My genius plan had already begun. We did have a starting budget of only a measly $3 million, so I would need to operate smart to begin with. To please our guests who were already flocking through our doors, I placed down a restroom and an emergency bunker, as despite not having a single dinosaur yet, it would help to improve our safety rating. To help bring in even more revenue, I placed down a food amenity where our guests could buy the most expensive burgers to ever exist. I followed this down by placing a marketplace facility so that I could buy some dinosaurs from the dodgy exchange. I had a brief look at what was on the market before then beginning to work on what would be my very first enclosure. I quickly placed down a response unit to help me handle any incoming arrivals, and then decided my very first purchase for the park would be some Morris Intrepidus. I was hoping that we might be able to convince some of our peasant guests that these tiny tyrannosaurs were actual T-Rex babies. I made the new arrivals enclosure up to their lofty standards, and then placed down a viewing gallery where our guests would be able to view our very first dinosaurs. Now that we could officially say that Jurassic World was up and running once more, I checked out our finances and saw that we were already making a nice profit of $65,000 per minute. But our accommodation rating was seriously lacking, and we did want those 5-star hotels in here for our luxurious guests. So I placed down one with a nice view over our Morris Intrepiduses. I was then given a government contract thanks to all my money and influence, and I opted for a bonus amount of money for hitting so many ticket sales, as I wanted to do that anyway, as that would drive more cash. Our amenities were now raking in a bit of profit, and after the success of our food one, I placed down a shopping and drinks amenity, and by day 3, our profit was already steady at up over $200,000 a minute. I took a quick minute to enjoy my island and what I had already began to create, before quickly getting back to work as I had so much more work to do. I made a few minor changes to my one single dinosaur enclosure to keep my creatures happy, before placing down a ton of activity centres. All these different types of activity centres would help to attract new guests to the park, which of course meant more ticket sales and more burgers bought. Thanks to my unmatched influence, I was given another easy government contract, which was basically free money at this stage. I then continued to place down all the remaining activity centres, including my very own rock climbing centre. But it was now time to extend my Jurassic World and start to get some more dinosaurs in for my guests to view. To do that though, I had to build a couple of monorail stations to transport my guests around the island, which was great as it improved my transport rating and also opened up lots of new space for my guests. Once that was done, I began to construct a new enclosure and then popped back into the dinosaur marketplace to look at what I could buy now. I ended up going for 4 Ornithomimimuses, which I'm not really sure why I did, as they were even labelled as a bad price, but I still managed to get them anyway. I had our new oversized fluffy chickens delivered, and then I placed down a viewing gallery so that our guests could view them. I decided to get some company for our new arrivals in the form of oviraptors, thinking that the more species we had in the park, the better it would be for attracting our guests. Although I was slightly disappointed by the lack of financial benefit that our new arrivals generated so far. I thought this could be because of a lack of restrooms and shelters on this side of the park that was stopping guests from wanting to make the trip over, so I placed those down, but for some reason our first guest over here immediately decided to leave and got back on the monorail. So I changed a few things around, moved our station, redid all the power, and then placed down some amenities to try and entice our guests over to our new station and area to explore. However, this still wasn't making the difference that I wanted, and despite being up to over $12 million at this point, it just wasn't good enough. So I took drastic action and placed down a hatchery, followed by a staff centre and then a control centre, as it was time to hire some scientists. This was something that I've been putting off for a while now, as the thought of having to pay some of my hard-earned money to some lazy Gen Zers was making me feel physically sick. Unfortunately, despite me being a genius, I didn't quite have the time amongst all my other businesses to cook up any dinosaurs in the lab myself, so my hand was forced on this one. I hired 3 scientists in total, with Kevin being my absolute favourite as he was the cheapest of the lot. Big up Kevin, we need more people like him in the world. I then spent a lot of my hard-earned money training up my scientists as I was planning something massive. You see, these nice small herbivores were just not cutting it anymore, and I needed ticket sales and attraction. Thus, I created a Scorpius Rex and released it into the enclosure with the oviraptors and the ornithomimuses.
Okay, we are cooked.
If the guests wanted entertainment, they were going to get entertainment. And probably a lot of death. Anyway, as the ornithomimuses probably weren't going to be around for too much longer, I started changing the enclosure to suit the Scorpius needs instead. I probably should have placed another response unit over this side of the island, but you see, that would have cost me some money. So I just decided to ask my other response team to try and look after my exhibit also. And to be fair to them, they showed some first-class commitment to the cause, as they somehow managed to get their car flying in an effort to reach the enclosure. Harry Potter and Ron Weasley did eventually reach the enclosure, where I placed down a gate, and made my first real blunder as CEO of Jurassic World. You see, this electric gate didn't have any power to it just yet while I was sorting that out, so the Scorpius Rex saw its opportunity and ran straight through the open gate without me even realising. I was slightly confused as to why I could hear all this running and screaming, before looking down and seeing Susie the Scorpius Rex strutting around the main street. Now, obviously a massive part of me thought this was absolutely brilliant, and it would be great as a Scorpius Rex would be able to eliminate some of the peasants from the world. But the problem was, if it ate any of my guests, I was going to be facing a massive lawsuit, which would not be good for the reputation of my Jurassic World. So I ordered a capture team immediately to come and trank out Susie the Scorpius Rex, and thankfully she was a very chill creature and didn't even eat anyone on this occasion. Bit of a close call there, but I fixed the gate and had Susie transported back into her enclosure. On day 15, I placed down an expedition site, so that I could get out into the world and search for some fossils. I had learnt from my mistakes now, and the smaller herbivore dinosaurs did not equal as much money as the bigger attractions, so from now on, it would be big, popular dinosaurs only. So off my scientists went to Mongolia to search for some Therizinosaurus fossils, as I knew this one would go down well with the guests. I had to place down a fossil centre where I could have my fossils delivered to, and when I did that, after a quick upgrade to my facilities, I was able to extract enough DNA from the Therizino fossils to be able to clone one. So with the DNA there to be able to create one, I began to make an enclosure, and then randomised the look of our future Therizino, who was about to arrive in my Jurassic World. Before it did though, I checked in on Susie, who was being unusually calm and not rampaging about killing everything. Perhaps I was just a genius and had managed to clone a friendly Scorpius Rex. Anyway, with Susie chilling, I got back to creating the enclosure for our new arrival that was pending, before checking in on our income, which was at $563,000 a minute, which was very nice to see. And hopefully our ticket sales would be about to reach a record high, as our guests got a great view of Susie finally going on the hunt and getting her first kill, which I'm sure the guests would absolutely love, and the animal rights organisations would be up in arms about. And that night ended a very busy day in our park, as Teresa the Therizinosaurus was introduced and left to get settled in. Well, the floodgates had now opened, as Susie went on the hunt once more after another ornithomimus. I was then presented with an opportunity of relaxing my security, which would allow me to let more guests in, and this was the easiest decision of my life. Of course I was happy to relax the security to increase that precious revenue. With more guests in, I added some more viewing areas for our guests to view Teresa the Therizinosaur, before regrettably spending some of my precious money topping up the fuel. Susie had now pretty much claimed the entire enclosure to herself, but had sparingly left the oviraptors as playmates. But the great thing about all these new guests was that I could place down all new amenities, which were just brilliant for our profit statistics. This one was selling fossilised teeth, and whether real or replica, I simply didn't care, just buy them all. Susie was being a bit naughty at this point and trying to escape to eat my guests, but she did not have the strength to break through my fences, so unluckily for her, she wasn't going anywhere. I then decided to incubate an Indominus Rex, as I knew after all the chaos this creature had caused before, the online controversy of this creature coming back in would surely mean more attention on my Jurassic World. As they say, all news is good news, although I decided not to release the Indominus into this enclosure, as I was pretty sure it would just break out and eat all my guests. So I came up with a second plan to release a second Scorpius Rex into the enclosure, as the first one was just so popular with the guests. I thought, why not get another one? So she would be named Sally and provide some probably unwanted company for Susie, who was so unenthusiastic about the introduction. First she tried to escape and then angrily ate a goat when that didn't work. But the profit we were generating had sort of hit a bit of a stalemate recently, and it was clear that we needed some more high profile creatures. So to the far east of my island, I began to create an aviary. Just as I was getting started on this and putting down a monorail station, a bloody tornado came in and attacked my park. This was very upsetting to me, as I couldn't just throw some money at the tornado and get it to go away, and had to spend an entire day repairing parts of my park that had been torn through by this rampaging monstrosity. And talking of monstrosities, Sally was continually trying to escape to eat some of the peasants she spotted walking by her enclosure. Anyway, the creature I wanted for my aviary was the Quetzalcoatlus, so off I sent an expedition team to dig for fossils. And while they did that, I prepared the enclosure and everything else that side of the island that would be needed to make this a real main attraction of our park. They came back with the fossils, and I had our poor minimum wage scientists extract it, and then got a new contract where I chose to increase the appeal rating of our park, as I was pretty sure that our new arrivals would be able to help with that. Before they arrived though, I did do a little bit of landscaping, and finally bit the bullet and placed down a response unit on the other side of the park, so that Harry Potter didn't have to continue to use his magic and get the car flying. But anyway, it was time to release the new star attraction of Jurassic World. Into my massive aviary entered the Quetzalcoatlus. I made a few biome changes to the aviary to suit our new arrival, and then extracted the rest of the fossils so that I would be able to clone a male Quetzal as well, but then received some terrible news. Poor Kevin, my favourite scientist, had been in an accident. I did decide to offer to pay his medical bills and then leak it to every single tabloid on the planet in the hopes that positive publicity would drive up our ticket sales. After all, no one likes a stingy billionaire. We did now have enough DNA to be able to clone a male Quetzal as well, so I went ahead and authorised that, releasing our second Quetzal into the aviary. I also added some cover for them, and then did some landscaping duties on my island, as I needed to flatten it out a little bit and wanted to make another enclosure. Sally was still trying to escape of course, but thankfully it was to no success, so happy that our Scorpios weren't going anywhere anytime soon, I began to place down secure fences to house our next marquee attraction of Jurassic World. To help afford these marquee purchases, I placed down some amenities near the aviary, as the guests were now starting to flock towards this area of the park after hearing about our new attractions. But it was time to look into my next purchase, and as sending out teams for expeditions cost money, I opted for a family of Metriacanthosaurs, 6 in total. These creatures were not cheap, costing me over $6 million, but I was assured that it was a good price, so was happy to sign off on it. I did some more monorail station building, as of course we would need to transport our guests right to the enclosure, as these lazy peasants didn't want to walk anywhere. But I was cut off as we had some fantastic news. The Quetzals had laid eggs, and 3 juveniles had hatched from them. This was absolutely brilliant, as juveniles have extra appeal to guests, which meant that everyone would want to come and see our baby Quetzals, and you can bet that I put up the ticket prices 50% following their introduction. At the end of the day, I had a financial review, and saw that the numbers were all going in the right direction, as we were now making $850,000 per minute, and importantly, on the up. Still, there was always room for more money, so I placed down another large amenity. Anyway, it was time now to open our new Metriacanthosaur exhibit to the general public, and people were eager to see these new creatures, especially our babies. Although I was very angry to see that one of them had been delivered with a minor fracture, so I of course named this Metrio Fracture. They had not specified this when I ordered the Metrio, so I was pretty annoyed about this and had to order the medical team to come out and heal Fracture, and as they made the perilous journey across my land, they only had to stop and turn back, as the fracture had now turned from a minor fracture into a major fracture, and this one was going to require surgery. But while I let the experts deal with that, I was back on the market once more for some new creatures, and this Tapejara was a good price apparently, so I bought them right away and released them into the aviary. Turns out that some of them were actually babies, and this was a nice extra bonus. Next to the Metrios, I thought that I would add a smaller enclosure just to get our species count up a little bit. You see, we were currently being penalised for what was called a lack of species variety, which was stopping my precious revenue from going up, so I just bought any old creature that I didn't really care about, which in this case turned out to be a Sinoceratops. Sorry to any Sino fans out there. As they were airlifted in, I did my best to make sure they were at home, and then saw that our profit was almost at that 1 million a minute mark, which was just a truly beautiful sight. But even my luxurious large hotels that I kept placing down wouldn't get rid of that damn species variety penalty, so I had to take actions into my own hands and began work on one massive herbivore enclosure. Despite the herbivore dinosaurs not being nearly as popular as the scary carnivores, they were quite cheap, and would mean that we would no longer be penalised for a lack of species variety. So I went on a little bit of rampage on the dinosaur exchange, buying whatever species I could get my hands on. Although clearly my head was a bit scrambled at this point, as I bought some more oviraptors, despite the fact that we already had some of these. At least the baby stegosaurs that arrived were actually pretty popular with the guests. The introduction of the new species did help to take us over that $1 million mark, despite the fact that the guests couldn't even view them yet. So I decided to make a gyrosphere attraction, going all around the exhibit so they would be able to see these cute Herbivore dinosaurs up close. A pretty genius strategy from a genius man. It looked like Sally though could do with some of my brains, as she was still trying to unsuccessfully climb out of her enclosure. But back with our new Herbivore dinosaur enclosure, perhaps the best bit about building new sections of my park was that I was able to place down even more amenities, which would continue to absolutely rake it in. But ultimately, my new Herbivore paradise had not had the impact that I'd hoped for. The creatures were simply not exciting enough, and I needed to get both that wow and fear factor in. So I began an enormous lagoon with no expense spared. As we hit day 50 now, it was really time to get serious about those finances and get some serious heavy hitters in. So out went the dig team to the north coast in search of some megalodon DNA. Income was pretty steady at this point, but we needed an X factor, and I was sure that some megalodons would help with this. The fossils came back and I had them extracted, and I put down a marine remote viewing gallery with a tunnel that would allow our guests to get an unrivaled look at the monsters of the deep. In other news, our tapajaras had gone and had some babies, which was excellent news, but really I was still focused on our megalodon and getting this lagoon up and running. I placed down a hatchery, powered it up, and began to cook up our very first megalodon. I placed down a shark feeder ready for it, and then released our very first female megalodon into the lagoon. I named her Mary, and with a whopping massive appeal rating, the guests were already flocking in to get a sight of Mary. And what was better than one megalodon? Well, two of course. I was very much still in the process of setting this area of the park up, but I was confident that soon, these new arrivals were going to lead to a very big cash flow injection. As we passed day 50 on this journey, we unfortunately did lose about 10 days of footage as the film crew decided to go on strike due to poor working conditions. So I of course did the only logical thing and fired them. Eventually I did get some poor new souls in on minimum wage to do my bidding, so here's a little catch up of what I did while the film cameras went rolling. First of all, I spent $8 million of my very hard-earned money buying a ton of mosasaurs, both juvenile and adult. I then put them straight in with the megalodons. Now, some animal rights charities weren't very happy about this for some reason, but the guests absolutely loved it. The thrill of seeing these apex predators in the same habitat was a true spectacle to behold, even if I was slightly nervous that my $1 million assets may decide to bite each other's head off at any given moment. And the megalodons had also been busy. I had released a male Meg, who had formed a lifetime bond with Megan, who was the second female released. They had had their very own child called Mighty, and I'm sure that the juvenile Megs and Moses were destined to be the greatest of friends. Poor Mary, the first ever megalodon, was doomed to be on her own for the rest of her life seemingly. Of course, with these magnificent creatures, I also placed down a luxury hotel for only our most premium guests. Jeff Bezos, for example, is booked in to stay next month. For the regular peasants who wanted a better view of these creatures, I opened my very own hot air balloon ride, which of course would give our guests an aerial view of the park, including over our magnificent lagoon. Of course, I was half hoping that the balloon would pop over the lagoon just for my pure entertainment. We had also introduced a singular Tyrannosaurus Rex in this time, which I had currently situated away from the guests to try and stop them from escaping and eating my peasants. I was currently preparing to unleash a second one of the opposite gender in the hopes of getting a baby Tyrannosaur, as babies were incredibly popular with the general public and led to more ticket sales. We had however now brought our profit up to $1.6 million per minute, and that was quite a lot, but of course I still wanted more to accomplish my dream of taking over the entire solar system. So now that we're all up to date, let's crack on with the final 40 days as I seek to make a shed ton of money. So back on day 60 now with a new film crew, I was focused on monetizing my lagoon section of the park as much as physically possible, as the guests were teaming in to watch both the Megalodon and Mosasaur in the same massive lagoon. I then extracted some more Tyrannosaur genome, but my silly scientists were not happy with me at all. I wanted to release a T-Rex of the opposite gender for that precious potential baby bonus, but apparently my overpaid scientists were very unhappy about being overworked, and if I continued to work them, I was going to suffer a public backlash. After being talked down from firing them all on the spot as any new hires would cost even more, through gritted teeth I sent them all away to some 2-star hotel for a few nights to recharge their batteries, and in the hopes they wouldn't sabotage my dinosaur theme park. And once they were duly rested, I got back to work. I saw that my very precious asset, Mighty the juvenile Megalodon, had picked up a sprain, which was rather concerning as to how that might have happened. While over on the dinosaur marketplace, I mulled over my next purchase. But for now at least, none of these creatures really had the appeal that I wanted, and thus after placing a couple of nests in the herbivore enclosure, I placed down an amphitheatre and started building the enclosure of all enclosures. This was truly going to hold something massive. But first I did get a bit distracted by Sally, who was suffering from concussion from banging her head constantly against the fence trying to escape. I did really want to leave her to get on with it, but I was advised by my medical team that she would pass away without any intervention, and I couldn't have a $1 million asset do that, so I begrudgingly accepted that she would need some treatment. I asked for Sally to be knocked out and transported to a paleomedical facility before continuing work on the next exhibit and snaking my monorail track all the way through the lagoon. Not quite sure how they built that while the megalodons and mosasaurs swam nearby, but no lawsuits happened, so it must have been light work for them. I then had a rather strange message pop up to say that apparently some famous politician had been murdered at my Jurassic World. I did find this quite strange as we hadn't had any dinosaur outbreaks in a while, but they were offering me free money, and I do bloody love money. The downside though was a hit to our publicity rating and also a sabotage risk. The latter I was not a fan of one bit. So reluctantly, I did choose to pay out $250k in compensation. After all, I do make that back in about 10 seconds in my park these days. For what I had planned though, I was going to need another scientist. So I appointed this charming fella here because he was 50% cheaper than any of the other options, and then spent a little bit of time training him up. However, I was getting more and more messages about guest fatalities and wondering what on earth was going on here. But things were going from bad to worse here at Jurassic World, as Mighty the juvenile Megalodon had starved to death. I could not believe what I was seeing, as this had been the most popular creature at the whole park, and the stupid thing had gone and starved itself to death despite being surrounded by food options. No wonder they had gone extinct. And I was also still getting continued notifications about guest fatalities and lawsuits, and for some reason I saw that my profit had dropped a lot. I couldn't for the life of me work out what on earth was going on here, and as far as I was concerned, all the creatures were safely in their enclosures. My first thought was that it must be the Scorpius Rexes, somehow finding a way out. But no, they were all fine, even though I had actually forgotten to get poor Sally treated, which I finally decided to do. Anyway, at least Terrence the Tyrannosaur was now in his enclosure, and this absolute stud had already formed a lifelong bond with his partner Matilda. My man just must be loaded with cash, like me. They had also already laid an egg, and shortly Jurassic World was about to welcome a baby Tyrannosaur into the park. And it might be needed, as for some reason my profit had been completely and utterly obliterated, and I was actually about to be in the red per minute. It was though at this moment that I found out what had been going on, and quite how long this Quetzalcoatlus had been out of its enclosure, I had no idea. I'm pretty sure though it had been over 5 in-game days, which is why understandably my publicity and safety rating had fallen off a cliff, and why I was also being sued left, right and centre. After I eventually had it knocked out and a maintenance team put down on this side of the island to repair the aviary that it had escaped from, but the damage had already been done, and we had suffered 10 days of hell in Jurassic World. From the death of our baby Megalodon, to a massive flying reptile that had been allowed to murder guests freely for a week before anything was done about it, my reputation had been well and truly dragged through the mud. I named the Quetzal Menace as this thing had single-handedly ruined my hopes and dreams, and then decided that the best way out of this rut was to release the Indominus Rex. I prepared an enclosure for our new addition, and attached to our amphitheatre, it would allow our guests to get a great view of Dr. Wu's finest creation, before welcoming in some baby stegos to the park. But on day 80, things were truly not getting any better, as I found a dead mosasaur juvenile that had been hunted down by a megalodon. To lose another star juvenile attraction was a massive financial hit, and I named the megalodon Brutal. So obviously after our financial hit, I had to get on the phone to the White House and ask for another one of those lucrative contracts, which they duly obliged, and I was then seated for the arrival of our Indominus Rex. It was good to see that these guests were so pleased to see our new arrival. But by this point, I had gone fully mental, and decided that one Indominus wasn't going to cut it, and I wanted to test whether I could successfully get 2 Indominuses to cohabitate successfully. In between all this though, I did still have time to show off my tricks on the maintenance quad bike, as I realised that the stupid maintenance team still had not repaired the aviary, and thus the Quetzals could escape again at any time. This was also stopping my safety rating from recovering, and I was pretty unhappy with this maintenance team. So I fired them. I flattened the land out a little bit and then placed down a new one in the hopes that it would fix all my problems. Plus I do quite like firing people. We were at least back in the green now, but things were still pretty rocky at Jurassic World, and it was still very much the beginnings of our road to recovery. I knew Indoms had met for the first time, and I held my breath in excitement of what may happen. I had been warned by every single scientist against this idea, but I'm a billionaire, so I do what I want. The two animals, however, were so amazed to see each other that they had possibly the longest stare-off that I've ever seen. I was slightly concerned that they were never going to move again, so I constructed a viewing gallery in the hopes that it would be great marketing. The dinosaurs that can't move. I was already picturing the viral TikToks, but sadly a day or two later, they remembered how to move and then started to fight. This wasn't exactly the ideal scenario, and the chance of happy families was seemingly quite low. One of the Indoms won the fight, and the other one camouflaged itself in shame and ran off. I was slightly concerned that this Indom was now looking for a way to escape, so I would have to keep a close eye on it, and chose to place down a shelter nearby, just in case the worst happened. The Quetzals, however, for now, were at least behaving themselves, and in all the excitement, I had missed the birth of the baby Rex, who was duly named Martin. I was actually getting a little bit fed up of managing all these dinosaurs, and as the Herbivore exhibit was getting a bit boring and overcrowded, I decided to just release Sally the Scorpius in there for a bit of entertainment for myself. However, apparently billionaires aren't allowed nice things these days, as I received a slice of karma when Sally was one-shot by a stegosaur protecting her young. Sally, though, who had spent most of her time here at Jurassic World banging into fences and injuring herself, costing me money in the process, had been an absolute disappointment. There was never a quiet day at Jurassic World, and as we approached the final 10 days of my quest for world domination, I found out that Matilda the Tyrannosaur was going to need surgery, as she had swallowed the door for one of the Ranger Jeeps. But while that matter was pretty urgent, I had another, even more urgent situation to deal with. No idea if they had forced their way out, or if the maintenance team simply hadn't done a good enough job of repairing the aviary, but a Quetz was on the loose again and devouring my guests. They seemed to have a real hunger for political figures, and while I was given the same option again, this time I didn't hesitate in taking that 2.5 million figure. Thank you very much, Quetzal. I watched with a range of emotions as this Quetzal first devoured my guests, which was quite amusing but also quite costly. It then went on to attack my ranger team as they tried to tranquilise it out, and eventually though they did get it, and the Quetzal took a nosedive to the ground, probably crushing some guests underneath it. I then caught my maintenance team being absolutely useless once more and inspecting my aviary from inside the trees. At this point I was pretty sure that Bezos had paid these fools off to sabotage my park. So I took matters into my own hands and started to repair the dome myself, as there is truly nothing that I cannot do. I then realised that we had another Quetzal on the loose. This Lone Ranger was being pretty well behaved lad to be fair, and just chilling on his own side of the island, but I couldn't risk another incident, so had to have the capture team sort it out, while I did some terrain modifications so that the lazy maintenance team would actually fix my goddamn aviary. But perhaps all of this had been a major distraction away from the issues on the other side of the park, as it was all starting to fall apart a bit. One of the Indoms had broken out and was somewhere on the loose. It actually took me a short while to find the Indom, and apparently she was just happy to be away from her sibling, as these guests were just chilling on the bench and had some unbelievable plot armor. I decided to cook up another Megalodon in the hopes of more juvenile Megalodons to bring our park back to the prestigious heights, and then had the Indominus knocked out, although I wasn't really sure what to do with her at this stage, as she was clearly just going to break out again. Turns out the other Indominus had much better traits, hence why she was a bit more content in her enclosure, but this one that was currently knocked out was a bit of a troublemaker, and I didn't really know how to deal with that. I continued to cook up the Megalodon, and then began to build another enclosure on the far northern side of our island, which would house the Suchomimus family that I had seen on the Dinosaur Exchange. Due to having both babies and adults, they would be popular additions of our guests, and after all the carnage of the last month, that was ever so needed. I would of course need a monorail station over by the enclosure, as well as restrooms, shelters, amenities and the lot, but the issue I first had to deal with was with this Indominus Rex. Eventually I did come up with a true master plan. I had her transported to the very far side of the island, nearby where the Metriacanthosaurs were stated, and then to make sure she was never going to get out, I dug a massive pit and put her at the bottom of it. The guests would truly never discover my dirty little secret here. In a desperate attempt though to bring my park back to its glory days, I made a massive purchase of $22 million and bought 6 Megalodons. The lagoon may be a little crowded now, and I can't imagine that the Mosasaurs were particularly impressed with this, but I couldn't say no to that 10k attraction bonus. Not sure how the Megalodons survived being delivered by helicopter, but there we have it. I guess even I don't know everything. I also forgot that I did have one more in the pen to be released, so I released that one also, and the Megalodons were now truly in charge of the lagoon. But just as I was getting back on track, I realised that I had done a truly dreadful thing. You see, I had Matilda tranquilized after eating the car door, but then had forgotten to do anything with her, meaning that she had starved to death in her sleep. This wasn't ideal, and poor Martin the baby T-Rex had now lost its mother, but the PR line to the guests was that Matilda was suffering from an incurable illness and we had done the kindest thing to put her out of her misery. They will truly never know the actual truth. I immediately tried to replace Matilda and give Terence a female replacement to mate with so that I could have more T-Rex babies. I placed down some amenities near the Suchomimus exhibit as we needed to up our amenity coverage, something that I of course had no problem doing, and then checked our profit to see that we were almost up to 2 million per minute. I had truly brought the park back to life from the brink. I also hired a new accountant and stopped paying income tax entirely, but that's a different matter. With all our new megalodons in the lagoon now, I placed a ton more shark feeders around the edge to make sure that we had no more starvation accidents before catching Terence fighting with what was meant to be his new mate. In concerning news though, the Indom had somehow climbed out of the pit of death and was on the loose. No one told the guests. Back in the lagoon, our new megalodons were causing carnage and murdering some mosasaurs, and to no one's surprise at all, Menace the Quetzal had once more found a way out of the aviary. It appeared that I was going to need another T-Rex, as Terence was determined not to start a new lineage, so I had one cooked up in the lab, set the capture team on the Quetzal, and saw to my delight, we once more had a baby megalodon in the park, which would be sure to bring in flocks of new visitors. Pleased with the news about that, I then had the new T-Rex transported, checked in on Martin who was doing great, even without his mother, and then considered buying some more Mosas for my lagoon, so that the numbers evened out a little bit. In the end though, I opted not to, as the report did label them aggressive and sickly. In devastating news that proved billionaires truly have nothing ever good happen to them, one of my megalodons had murdered the baby megalodon in cold blood. This megalodon was obviously given the name of Cannibal, and I apparently just had no luck when it came to baby megalodons. However, as day 100 rolled around, we had now hit a profit of 2.7 million per minute, and I was satisfied with all that I had built. Thanks to me and absolutely no one else, I had built an absolutely brilliant park with brilliant safety, healthy attractions, and the greatest section of amenities a park has ever seen. But all of that work had been far too taxing on my mental health, and when later that day Jeff came in with an offer of $250 billion, I gladly accepted, and made sure to get all the paperwork signed before we found out about the Indominus Rex hole on the far side of the island. So that is the end of this journey. I hope you have all enjoyed watching me become filthy rich, but hey, if you have enjoyed this video, why not watch the one on your screen now? YouTube thinks you will love it. Thanks all for watching guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.